Hey guys. So, in the interest of making my YouTube channel a little more interesting and covering topics that about unconditional love that may you might find useful, especially when we understand the physics behind unconditional love, it's a lot uh, easier to see it sometimes. A lot of us learn a lot of different ways. So sometimes it's easier to see something in front of you so we get a better picture of what the heck we're looking at, why it's probably one of the most challenging things that we go through, right? Unconditionally loving one another, especially when somebody's outright attacking you. Um, to love that person regardless of whatever they're doing is very difficult. So all of it, we are co-creating this whole thing. So this is in the interest of co-creation, and the truth will set you free, right? If unconditional love has the power to set you free, which a lot of spiritualists have said before in the past, Jesus being one of the chief ones, love God above everything and love your neighbors yourself, it all comes down to love. So why is that? This video is going to show you some of the physics behind that, and then I'm going to do a follow-up video on what that path looks like and how to breathe correctly. Breathing is part of creation, right? The action of breathing in and out, or out and in, represents frequency and how to raise your frequency, or maybe your frequency is lowered because your breath rate might be going faster or slower, right? And a lot of that is dependent on unconditional love energetically. So I guess we could start with this slide. This first slide, I like this first slide because it shows one galaxy, right? One basic thing that's everything swirling towards the center. If you look at the center, it's the brightest point, and everything in there looks separate, but it's all collapsing in on one point. And as we'll continue to see, is it all came from that point as well. The heart of the system is where everything comes from, and it goes back to. So let's go to the next slide. So I had a choice to put my cameo on this slide. I decided to put it over Neptune instead of Uranus, right? Uranus? I don't know how to say it. Uranus sounds better to me. Anyway, in the lower right-hand corner there, you see that's kind of like a AI picture of a black hole. It's really hard to find a really good picture of a black hole, but a black hole has a tendency to suck rather than blow. If you guys have seen the movie Spaceballs, you understand what I'm saying, right? Megamaids turn from suck to blow. Anyway, so it's a toroidal field that is where it's primarily just pulling everything towards it. A star, like our solar system, is primarily exerting energy. So physicists, I've actually had this conversation with physicists, and I've asked this question a lot of times. I said, what makes us believe that everything isn't all a toroidal field? And when we look out in larger and larger places in the universe, we're just seeing longer cycles. So we might be looking at a black hole that is just getting ready to switch back to a star. We know that black holes form when stars supposedly collapse in on themselves, but what if we're just watching the natural process of the frequency of a field flipping from producing energy to receiving energy, just like us, right? We create and we receive. We have a creative circuit and we have a receptive circuit. Now, relative to us, and when we'll watch each other, right? Right now, I'm in my creative energy. So I'm creating information and energy. But when I'm sitting on the couch just watching a movie or watching some presentation that somebody else is giving, I'm receiving energy, right? I look like a black hole. or I look like a shining star. One of the two, right? So everything really kind of looks this way, and all of us flip back and forth between the two. So this is how everything works, right? When we look at the subatomic level, if we measure the frequency of anything, we see a sine wave that goes plus and minus. That's what we see when we look at frequency energetically or electrically. We're seeing a sine wave that goes into the positive and then back to the negative and back to the positive. So when somebody describes their frequency, they're talking about how fast they're flipping back and forth. And the closer that you can collapse down to the neutral point, the faster that your frequency is actually flipping back and forth, because you're in the present moment and you're grounded. And we'll talk more about that in my next video. But suffice it to say, everything looks pretty much the same. There isn't anything that really looks any different when you really get down to it. Everything is a structure within a field, and that field switches back and forth between positive and negative to create current that runs through that electrical structure. And here we have our traditional toroidal field here with our positive and negative. This is kind of representative of us, right? Where we have our upper half. And this shows a limit to the field, but actually when you measure your biofield, and we can measure the field of energy around somebody, this flash sack, right, that is being represented in this video, is just the electrical circuit within the field. And then if we look closely enough, when we look at the parts of our flesh, we see more fields stacked up on each other. That's creating the electrical circuit. This is the yin and yang of the universe, right? The field and the structure. And when we look at the field, we're actually looking at a part of a structure. And then when you add all those fields together, it creates a structure. So everything looks like structure, but when you look at it close enough, it's just a field. When a lot of times we think that we're looking at something else, and our eyes deceive us many times. So the world tree is one of my favorite spiritual symbols. It says so much just within that one drawing. I really like this picture of the world tree because it shows the root system so largely versus the upper canopy of the tree, because the roots are all in darkness. So our lower half is always in darkness. Half of us are always in the dark. We're producing energy, but we don't know exactly what we're getting back. The only thing that we can do is focus on what we're producing and how we're viewing the world, and understand that that's the energy we're going to get back. When you look at any one of these fields, especially I like this picture of the toroidal field of the galaxy, where you're seeing everything's coming from the top, and then it kind of comes out, and then it collapses back in on the heart of the system. So we know for a fact that everything that we produce comes back to us, comes back in longer and longer cycles. Sometimes the energy we put out there might not come back for years later, depending on what kind of impact it had on somebody, or what vibrational level we were at, right? Spiritualists call it karma, but we're always experiencing karma, and it's all originating from dharma, or our own mind. The dharma produces karma, or the internal produces the external. This is always the way it is. And if you look at the picture, the picture is telling you that everything's coming from the very inside of that system to produce something from on the outside that is actually representing the state of what's inside of that system. Tendency. This is the tendency that we live in our creative energy, or the tendency we live in our receptive energy. And so the percentage tendency will indicate, and this is a simple way of looking at it, you can take a picture of someone's biofield and see where any of us have blockages, in our throat chakra, or our heart chakra, or our third eye chakra, or down below. The blockages that happen in our lower half are representative of the blockages that we have in our upper half, because they will, like we've seen in the picture, everything's being produced up and out, and so that's how we're receiving ourselves on the top side. Once we learn to stop judging our external world, or worrying about whether we're going to be judged when we express ourselves, or in our art, or in our speech, or in our music, then we receive a lot better, right? When we just fall out of judgment and just become pure us, and all of us are so original in that way. But we're all vibrating at a lower state when we're not in our creative energy, and we're not expressing ourselves to each other in a healthy way. When we feel like we can't speak or can't talk to one another, all those are indicative of maybe a lower vibrational state, which is pulling us down, and we're maybe not in our creative energy as much. And when we say creative energy, I think for the purpose of this video, because we're talking about unconditional love, we'll focus on the fact that it's how much we are loving ourselves that's getting produced in our circuit to the world around us, how much we are producing love for each other in our environment, simply put, right? So yeah, welcome to Shaniqua and Walter. I don't know, those two names, for whatever reason, those two names occur to me more than anybody else whenever I think about men and women. Walter and Shaniqua. Maybe that's my dream couple, right? Maybe I was Walter in a previous life, or Shaniqua in a previous life. I don't know. Anyway, so, you know, it's very difficult for us to look at everything in creation as purely positive. I mean, we have to, because it all comes from source, and half of it's in the dark. So if half of it's in the dark and it doesn't understand that we are whole in and of ourselves, that then we'll see if we see ourselves as not whole, we project an unwholesome image on the things around us, and then try to make someone else feel less than, because internally we feel less than. That's the simplest way, but the way that to describe it. But the beast feeds on itself in a variety of different ways, right? There's always a receiving energy, no matter what. Doesn't matter how wholesome we are always receiving what we are producing. So it's always a percentage of positive, negative of what we're producing. All of us have to understand that, the things that we put out there is what we get back. And how well we're able to manage our emotional state, how well we feel secure within ourselves to be able to uplift the people around us and treat them like what we would want to be treated. And then walk away from, you don't have to not love somebody, and not necessarily even have to walk away. If you're in the neutral state, and this is something that I've come to understand recently, you can transmute any energy projected at you. If it has a negative effect on you, then that's an adverse reaction to the body. This whole universe is part of your body. So anytime you're having an adverse reaction to the body, it means that you're not protecting your energy, regardless of whether or not you're directly interacting with it. You don't have to directly interact with it or not. If it's having an adverse reaction to the body, then you're reacting to something and believing that it can have power over you to negatively affect you. This is ultimate alchemy, right? At the same time, Walter and Shaniqua, are connected at the heart space at source. And so depending on, let's use an example. Let's say Walter's being just a jerk, right? He's projecting a bunch of negative energy. He's looking at Shaniqua in a negative way. And Shaniqua is, she just is unimpressed, just completely neutral. It's like, Walter, I believe you have a problem. What's the matter? Why are you blaming your state of being on me? Haven't you mastered yourself? Something along those lines. Then all of that energy gets projected back onto Walter. Now, Walter has to come to realize, okay, why am I thinking negatively about somebody that doesn't think negatively about me? Now, if Shaniqua decided to return the same eye for an eye, then you get a feedback loop of energy. Now, Shaniqua and Walter are feeding on each other just like animals, whereas when we don't respond, when we don't react negatively to other people's negative projections, now those negative projections get rebounded back onto the source, right? Because we're all connected at source. And this is kind of why I drew this picture this way, and why unconditional love is so powerful. Because if you can unconditionally love everyone, then all of us have to deal with our own issues. Whereas whenever you're looking at somebody in a negative light, it actually will pull you into karmic battles with other people that are looking at you in a negative light. And then you're just harming yourself in the long run, especially when you run into somebody that isn't looking at you negatively, right? This is the spiritualist journey. This is the basic concept of how unconditional love can create eternal growing state in you. But there is, you still have to breathe correctly. And breathing correctly is very difficult. We have a lot of unconscious negative opinions of ourselves unconsciously, just that we have to confront unless we go through the process that I'm getting ready to show you in the next slide. So you have to excuse me. The process that I'm getting ready to, that's the next video, not the next slide. But traveling forward in faith and learning to breathe correctly is ultimately, what can set you free. Most tarot card readers and spiritualists out there are 99% of them are alone. Very few of them have connected together in a group because, for one thing, none of us want to be the target of what everybody else comes to support that group, right? You want to be able to have everybody stand on their own 2 feet, right? And this is one of the hardest things to come to terms with when we have when we live money in our system. Well, I'll talk about money in the next video, but money is controlled by somebody else. It's not controlled by us. So the only thing that we can control is the energy that we are producing. Now, because of the society that we live in, and what money does and how people view one another, it's created all these hierarchical systems that you see here on the upper left, right? You've got almost every corporate structure. There's very few co-creative models out there. People are working in equality. If you go to work for somebody, you're working for somebody else's idea, right? Every company I ever worked for, I was working for somebody else's project. And because of that, I'm not creating for myself. Now, you can unconditionally love everybody around you and get yourself out of the karmic circuit in those work groups to make sure that you're not getting negatively impacted by negative projections that somebody might have of you. Somebody's invariably is going to be intimidated by you, especially if you're not affected by whatever drama they got going on. This happens all the time. I'm sure you guys have experienced all this stuff in work groups. The kind of people that are watching my channel and actually watching this video, you guys know what I'm talking about. All of us have been in work environments where it gets pulled into social cliques, and they're kind of like trauma bonded cliques. People that have different kind of trauma bonds that are pulled together for that reason. People that think that they're in a more elevated state and they don't want to, involve themselves with the lower echelon, right? And so you've got these tiered groups in a business structure that, because people don't know how to, teach how to control their energy and teach how to love one another unconditionally, to create more equality across the board and to listen to one another. This is why those groups break down, right? They don't talk to each other. So the products that we produce represent those unhealed wounds, and the products that we produce are primarily made for profit and control structures, because people are trying to control each other within a hierarchical structure. So it's all about, most of the energy is wasted on trying to control the actions of other people, and so the products represent that. The hardest thing to deal with, and this is going to go to all you guys, the hardest thing to deal with when it comes to sales, and this is one of the first things that you get taught when it comes to sales, is you have to produce a sense of lack in somebody else in order to make a sale. Somebody has to feel like they need what you want, what you have to offer, right? This is one of the most difficult things. Now, you want to create a natural attraction. In order to have a natural attraction, people have to naturally feel like you have something that you have to offer, instead of forcing, something where it feels like they need that thing, right? All of us that have wounding, and myself included, and you grow through things, and you start to understand the wounding that you have, where it feels like you need to, attach yourself to certain programming, is just feeding that wound, right? And every time that we feel like we need to engage in that programming, it's feeding a wound that we have. Maybe it's some sort of conflict within us. We're in conflict with each other. Sales in and of itself, when you're just selling a product, is kind of that way. Now, if you get into the point of creating and naturally receiving, that's a much harder path, which I'm going to cover in the next video. But it's also naturally breathing. You're learning how to naturally breathe again. But in order to naturally breathe again, it's all about detachment, letting go of things that don't serve you, because everything you're attached to is limiting your creativity and your ability to create. The more time that you spend in front of the TV, or the more addictions could be anything, right? It's an addictive behavior that's actually feeding a sense of lack within yourself that you can't provide to your environment. And it's always going to be a lot funner creating for yourself than it is going to be just sitting there consuming all day long. You'll fall into depression, right? Unless you balance that your time and your creative activities. So, where do we go from here? Balancing ourselves internally will always result in better relationships. The last thing you want to do is, and when I saw detachment and letting go, a lot of times that's in our relationships too, right? If people can't learn to stand on their own 2 feet, then it's harder to create healthy relationships with them, right? If they're always dependent on you. Now, on the flip side, you can't really include the elderly, the disabled, and children in that one, right? They can't generally stand on their own 2 feet. And we're always going to have to take care of those people who have gotten past their prime, or maybe not used to standing on their 2 feet. And there's some people that grow to a very old age and die before they can't stand on their own 2 feet, right? I've met some pretty energetic guys out there that could always, and women both, that could always help themselves almost till the day they died, and they would refuse to let anybody help them anyway. It's like, if I need help, then I'm going to go out with dignity. But it's not, to my way of thinking, it's not undignified to ask for help or to understand that you need help. But I hope this video was helpful for some of you guys. The next video I'll deal with the process of breathing correctly. You'll never be able to do it in a business. This picture I have on the lower right here, this is just kind of an example of maybe a star picture where, once you get to a place where you could start creating physical products. So think about the physical products that we have in this world. How many of our physical products come from equal cooperative communities that are creating together, where they're valuing each other's time the same? There really isn't very many out there. You might find a few knickknacks from, cooperative villages that are very small, but for the most part, all the physical products that we see in this world, except for, certain paintings or certain, candles, or just things that people have created, most of it's entertainment based, right? YouTube, this channel, other YouTube channels, or you just have creators creating things. And the thing is if you're not creating something that's bringing people closer together, there's a sense of lack in that creation as well. I was watching a YouTube video the other day of somebody that was creating a review of just graphics cards, and he admitted at the end of he's like, I've been really depressed lately because he's spending 12 hours a day creating videos that really, games and things like that, kind of, you might meet somebody virtually in a game, but does it really bring it closer together? Unless we can spend time to each other intimately and together, then you're not really, providing material that's going to bring people closer together. Love is the most powerful thing, and unconditional love and accepting people for where they are is the most powerful thing. It doesn't matter how much wounding we have, or how much we're not healed, or how much creative ability we are. If you can steer people towards that process to where we can have healthier relationships, where we know how to pick each other up and create the right state in one another, so that we naturally receive what we want to receive, right? You want to be supported by the people that you see. You don't want to be talked down to, or have people point fingers at you and make you feel less than. That's the last thing that any of us want. And it should be the last thing that any of us want to do to each other. But unfortunately, we live in a world that's fed on each other in so many different ways for so many, if you grew up in a family where you had a lot of money, potentially, you don't have to learn how to create positivity in somebody else. If you can pay for somebody to do what you want, then, right? Which is why in the next video, it's so important that we don't follow the money. You want to be able to create from your heart space and let that naturally attract what you need back to you, and forget about the money. You'll get everything you need in the long run anyway. You might get a lot of money, you might get a little money, and it's going to be different at all different times. But what you'll find is, if you're creating things that's going to bring people closer together, that will always be beneficial to you in the long run, and it'll expedite your spiritual growth. So I hope this video helped you guys in some way and kind of see the physics of unconditional love and how that works in our biofields. How all of us need to be creative and naturally attract, and letting go of attachments. And anytime we go to work for someone else's idea, we can unconditionally love one another, but there's always going to be a part of us that feels blocked mostly because of the structures that we have to go to work in and the way they're structured, right? You'll find that if you can figure out how to work with a good group of people that you're directly interacted with, and you'll cherish that forever. But if they're all fighting, you're just going to want to leave, right? Anyway, love you guys. Have a beautiful day, and we'll see you in the next one.